Welcome again to the Quantum Yoga Podcast. My goodness, we have Dan Winter today, and Dan is, among other things, an author, a physicist, a lecturer, an inventor, and even perhaps a spiritual scientist, if we can use that term. His biography is very extensive. I don't want to waste our time on talking too much about that, but let's just jump right in. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining the program.
Thanks. It sounds like you have a very interesting audience. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Perhaps a good place to start, because there are technologies that you have invented and developed that I want to get into a little later in the conversation. But as a groundwork where people can kind of understand where it all came from, can you start us there? And it sounds like some of your math around plasma, fractality, and these various terms that some may be new to people. Can we start there?
Well, yes. You know, the main website is fractalfield.com, and we originally developed a three-dimensional model. It's basically the infinite stellation dodecaecosa in 3D, which models DNA, and later we proved hydrogen. And doing the math around that showed golden mean ratio as a wave function. So more than just beauty, it was, we proved with new equations, the optimized mathematics of constructive wave interference, and therefore constructive charge compression, therefore cause of gravity and entropy. And then we've applied that in dozens of technologies, and we've been successful, plasma among them, yes.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that you have handy some visuals that will help kind of lead people through, because we have a lot of visual learners that are a part of this. So whenever you want to throw those up as illustrative, that would be fantastic.
Okay, well, I have this little keynote. Let me see if I can get my show together here. So this is the basic presentation. It's a fractal implosive conjugate charge collapse. So implosive charge collapse. Can you see that slide?
Yeah.
So then usually these animations, which are playing nicely here, but I imagine the animations play rather slowly on your screen, but that's a visual of that 3D stellation dodecaecosa, which has the geometry of flame at the center. So if we just look at that visual there, that is implosive charge compression. It's called phase conjugation, optimized by golden ratio, Hermes symbol Caduceus, literally simply where two pine cones kiss noses. And if you see on the bottom right, the top-down view of DNA, every living protein, and later I proved the top-down view of hydrogen, you see what happens because of golden ratio is the wavelengths. Wavelengths not only add and multiply recursively constructively, but the wave phase velocities add and multiply recursively constructively, turning charge compression into charge acceleration towards center, which is named the gravity and the origin of all negentropic centripetal forces. We've applied that successfully in water at the imploder.com, and of course we have propulsion technologies. Notably now we've applied it in plasma, therify.net, and we're successful in 20 countries, making negentropy self-organization.
Yeah, and negentropy is, maybe we start there, right? As a model of sort of what is life, what is self-organizing versus the opposite of that, which would be entropy, right? This is just kind of the randomization chaos of kind of things falling apart, if you will.
Yes, it's true. We think that conventional physics is sadly mistaken in thinking the universe is condemned to entropy, moving eternally toward disorder. We think that's a mistake. And the first time that negentropy, which is to say self-organization, was measured in physics was phase conjugate optics, where not only did they find time reversal, which by that they only meant negentropy or increased order, but they found self-organization. And we've extended that now to phase conjugate magnetics and phase conjugate audio and phase conjugate plasma. And we believe essentially that is the origin of all negentropic forces, especially including life. For example, it's well proven and measured that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. Bill Tiller's work, Conscious Acts of Creation, and Uri Geller even showed focused human attention reduces radioactive half-life. Now we know why and how, because focused human attention is electrically centripetal.
Well, this is fascinating. So we do have quite a bit of meditators that are our listeners to this, and we've interviewed meditators who are kind of looking at the brain and looking at how to optimize focus. And so talk, if you can, a little bit more about this quality of human attention.
Our technology for measuring that is called flameinmind.com. And it's a wireless Bluetooth transmitter, talks to iOS. And here is me having a bliss experience. And this is the right-left hemisphere EEG power spectra, showing not only balanced right-left alpha beta, but exactly 5 harmonics in the brainwave frequencies in golden mean proportion, which is called phase conjugate charge implosion, the cause of bliss and ultimately peak perception.
Got it. So this is your working definition of bliss.
Absolutely, yes. That basically the body charge implodes, and notice that these 5 frequencies are specifically tuned to Planck and golden ratios. So not only do we know the ratio, we know the scale, and it links directly to the harmonics of the Schumann, which is the origin of brainwave alpha beta, is the Schumann harmonics. And so you're literally imploding the negentropy of the planet Gaia itself. Here we have that slide. So this is my equation, 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, and 19.09 Hertz are the exact golden ratio exponents of Planck, the origin of all negentropy and the cause of hydrogen and gravity. And these are the known Schumann harmonics, and these are the harmonics of the brainwave at the moment of bliss. And these are also the harmonics we feed the Therify plasma here to create negentropy. So essentially what's happening is that 2 pine cones kiss noses accurately at the Planck threshold, and charges implodes through the speed of light into longitudinal EMF, the mechanism of all healing, and most all spiritual phenomena is longitudinal EMF. And that implosion is enabled by tuning the golden ratio cascade directly to the Planck series. And the equation for that we have here as well. So it looks like this.
Got it. So if we were to continue further up in the harmonics into the gamma range beyond beta, what would that look like? I'm not doing the math, but is that something that you consider in Flame in Mind, or you kind of stop at the beta range?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a special option in Flame in Mind to display what we call Tibetan gamma. And the most common Tibetan gamma, around 44 Hertz, we believe nails that power spectrum. So exactly right. The thing is, access to the lower frequencies is access to the deeper unconscious, the so-called theta healing, which we have made measurable. But the access to the higher frequencies is the higher intellect, basically the higher telepathic. And that equation, if we extend that equation here, we see these are the equation-based harmonics. This is the alpha, beta, theta. These are the Schumann harmonics. And these are the sacrocranial harmonics. They're all predicted by that equation.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
There's
So
the sacrocranial there. This is the Mayer wave here, 0.1 Hertz, the most important frequency of the body. These are the mid-tidal, long-tidal. So in green, you have the measured sacrocranial critical frequencies of Kundalini and bliss, sacrocranial. And in red, you have my equation.
how would you describe the experience, or your experience, or the generalization of the experience for someone who is achieving these harmonics on a brainwave level?
Well, that's the right question. You know, I started having bliss experiences doing Gurdjieff sacred dance, Kundalini experiences when I was in the Gurdjieff school, after graduate school psychophysiology. And it feels like a lightning bolt going up your tailbone, and then a hot flame you can't put out on the top of your head, the tongues of fire, so to speak. And it accelerates metabolism. And the phenomenon is not unlike what we do with the plasma in Therify. It's a plasma accelerator, and if you can remain grounded, you can give use to all that information. We recommend the book Earthing. However, if you don't remain grounded, it will drive you nuts, quite literally. But it's information density. It's the same reason why if you put the capacitive implosion called the crown on the king, if he's angry, he will go nuts faster. If he's thinking shareable thoughts, he will inhabit the kingdom. His aura will literally embed in the land, and he will control the weather.
So when you're getting all of these harmonics lined up, and you're having this experience, which sounds like the classical Kundalini experience. This is a pretty high arousal experience. It's not a deep, immersive, kind of quiet mind, no experience state where someone is feeling necessarily perfectly still and utterly peaceful. This is a very vibratory, energetic kind of experience.
Gopi Krishna and Krishnamurti both prayed so that their Kundalini would end because they thought the lightning was killing them. They did not understand the biophysics. I've been teaching the biophysics of Kundalini for 30 years to the point of measuring it even in the microwave, not mentioning the infrasound and sacrocranial. So we know a lot about that physics, and it is absolutely the ability to inhabit a lightning bolt, in which case the first unshareable thought will burn. And we know exactly why. Destructive wave interference.
So help me then kind of understand how you would caution someone if they're using Flame in Mind. They're using this sort of neurofeedback software to achieve this state, or being guided into this state. Is it self-regulatory, in other words, whereby the body, the mind would prevent themselves from imploding, or you have to verbally coach someone? You have to give them some step-by-step leveling here.
Well, remember, flameinmind.com originally is a device that measures whether you succeed. It's not a device that makes you succeed. So we can see when you have alpha coherence, alpha beta. However, additionally, now we have Flame in Sound, which is, we believe, the ultimate, most psychokinetic possible binaural beat audio that comes with Flame in Mind, which does powerfully help induce that. And those exactly harmonics, originally Bob Monroe considered so powerful, they were dangerous because they would push your aura out of the top of your head. So yes, it is possible to overdo your metabolic fire, and there are many cautions, and not unlike the cautions for those who go in Therify plasma. Get grounded, get hydrated, and there is such a thing as too much. The technical term for that is hormesis. The symptoms would be dehydration and non-grounding, basically. And the book Earthing is one of the solutions. So yes, yeah, there are many cautions, and Kundalini can be quite dangerous. But on the other hand, ultimately, metabolic density is plasma density, and plasma density is the only form which information density takes. Literally, therefore, the definition of awareness itself, where embedding and conjugation is perfect, where the pine cones kiss nose.
Got it. So there is a skill set involved here that one needs to become adept at managing this massive energy experience. And
yes, and yogis have been teaching about that for years, the deep breathing and all the exercises, and they said it's dangerous, and they were right. Our addition to that is we make it measurable, and we've described the physics all the way down to the microwave.
Got it. Okay, so Flame in Mind is a diagnostic, it's a measurement tool, not necessarily a neurofeedback tool.
Well, it is a neurofeedback tool, but it doesn't force you to have Kundalini. It does show if you have alpha beta coherence. Actually, my first bliss experience with that device was when I turned it on and realized it was working. I had bliss. but we have evolved it powerfully. Now we've added the powerful binaural beat sound, which is bliss inducing, very tunable. And now we've added a 4-channel brainwave to it, where we measure the front versus rear brain dominance. Let me see if I can show you that here. So by measuring front versus rear brain dominance, we can, I don't have those slides here, but we can actually show you whether your rear brain dominance, which is necessary for the in the flow condition of, well, I guess I didn't turn anything. Well, in other words, the sports literature is clear. If you want to be in the flow, which is pure reactive instinctual reactance without conscious intermediation with the reaction, so the reaction time is faster, named in the flow and well researched in the sports literature, it's absolutely true. Your rear brain coherence must be dominant, and your forebrain coherence must be more relaxed. And the new 4-channel EEG capabilities of flameinmind.com, which used an animated eyeball, and sorry I didn't cue up those visuals here, but enables that training as well. So it's undoubtedly the world's most powerful bliss meditation teaching tool for EEG, for sure.
Got it. So you're using the Muse headband as the hardware interface for Flame and
That's
Mind.
correct.
Okay.
We use Muse headband is required. Yes,
And
it's a
you're
one-time.
accessing the rear. There are additional rear electrodes. I'm not familiar with the latest version of Muse, but are they able to read the occipital area and is that where you're looking when
The,
you're saying rear?
the Muse headset is useful in that of course, the band across the forehead gives you the reference and the 2-channel EEG for the forehead, total 5 electrodes. But in addition, the carbon or conductive impregnated rubber, which makes a beautiful connection to your rear brain behind the ear, gives you lovely rear brain EEG coherence measure. It's very stable, and it's easier to put on than sunglasses, practically. It's very cool.
Got it. Got it. That all makes sense. And you mentioned, I think, in one of our email conversations that Maxwell Cade's device is an ancestor to some of the work here regarding Flame and Mind. At least the visual display sort of looks like that.
Actually, that's true. In Cade's device, the awakened brain used, if we go to Flame and Mind here, used the right-left hemisphere display, displaying alpha-beta coherence like that beautifully. And they even had a measurement and a term. Oh, here, I guess maybe you can see this. Now, this is where we have the eyeball displaying the front rear brain. So you actually develop that coherence and the eyeball animates. It's very cool. And there's showing you whether your alpha and beta are in golden ratio or octave ratio. Golden ratio alpha beta is intuitive and literally bliss, whereas octave ratio alpha beta is more telepathic, and it's very archetypal, and all that description is there. But in these visuals here, now I have down below, I have the original awakened brain Cade device. And the thing that was cool is in that device, they labeled the picture of alpha beta as bliss peak experience. It's taking a while to load here, sorry about that. But they labeled that as bliss peak experience. But the only thing they didn't do was measure the fact that the ratio of the frequency alpha to beta was golden ratio. That's what they missed in Cade's work. If they'd simply taken their own graph of the brain waves for bliss and measured the ratio in frequencies between alpha and beta, they would have found golden ratio. Actually, though, we have to credit Korotkov there, because Korotkov did discover golden ratio in EEG. Cade, good. I even found it. Look at that. I'm good. So here is the graph from the mind mirror in Cade's book, Awakened Brain, of their picture of the alpha. Now, this is the low frequencies top, beta up. So, but the alpha to beta peaks here, which is their picture of alpha, beta, theta, of the brain waves making bliss, created the spiritual state. And if they had simply measured the ratio of this frequency to this frequency to this frequency, they would have found golden mean, but they never measured that. Korotkov, on the other hand, did a beautiful job. He was doing this measurements of children in Russia learning to see without their eyes, and he'd found the most dominant way to measure people who could see without their eyes was the fact that their brainwaves, right here, this is Korotkov technical report, the attractor would be the ratio in frequencies, golden ratio, in the frequency spectrum of the EEG. So Korotkov is the real pioneer of golden mean ratio in brainwaves. I simply then developed the hardware to make that measurable interactively.
Amazing. Wow. That's pretty neat.
And then I wrote the paper that is in fact the cause of perception. I'm going to turn off my sharing here, sorry. That if the paper is fractalfield.com/conjugate perception, that I don't know if this is the place for it, but we proved that phase conjugation is also the reason that color exists, and the reason rainbows exist, and the reason rainbows are documented to show up when Tibetan saints die, because they add centripetal charge to the atmosphere. But once you begin to understand that, you understand that that same concept of phase conjugate charge implosion through the Planck threshold non-destructive charge collapse, which is Einstein's definition of the unified field, is actually the cause of perception.
So we're all experiencing some amount of this harmonic synchrony that's happening in the golden ratio, because we are all, to some extent, perceiving a universal reality. However, there's always been practices that have trained people to basically increase this sort of harmonic density.
And we could say that when people travel the world seeking sacred space, what they're seeking is charge implosion, and they don't need airlines to do it if they understand the physics. But here's a practical example. If you remove the poisonous fluorescent light in children's classroom and install sunlight, as I've said many times, you can measure a dramatic increase in attention span. The new information is we now know why, because attention is caused by the phase conjugation present in the harmonics of sunlight, which is why 30% of the people who step up after the Therify plasma experience report sharpened vision.
Okay, so this is a good place to talk about color then. And are we talking about frequencies in the visible color range of the sun, or are we talking about other aspects of the electromagnetic spectrum that cause this attentional quality, this increased attention?
Oh, well, lovely that you're asking the right questions here. Let me see if I can drag up the fun picture that goes with that conversation. Okay, can you see this picture here now?
Yes.
Okay, so on the right, you have the physics of photosynthesis. If you look at photosynthesis, you see the frequencies and colors which cause photosynthesis are a very narrow peak. Look, the amount of photosynthesis that happens is precise only when this peak of orange and this peak of purple. Whereas if you get the frequency of green, you will actively prevent photosynthesis, which is why all living plants spit out the green photon. So I discovered the cause of photosynthesis when I wrote the equation that said that these exact only two frequencies which cause photosynthesis are exactly golden ratio exponents times Planck. Precisely. This is not an accident, which also, by the way, is 3 radii of hydrogen. So photosynthesis is caused by phase conjugate negentropic charge collapse. So we know for sure that the cause of photosynthesis is phase conjugate negentropic charge collapse. But if we extend that principle, we can see that that is the cause of the existence of color itself. So that if you, first of all, we need to know that the photon is plasma, and all plasma travels toroidally. So therefore, the photon's a donut. Very simple. And if you know anything about electrical engineering, which is my life, you know that the cone of the eye, the only place you see color, the only thing you can use a cone for as an antenna is to measure the tilt or phase angle. Therefore, by definition, color is the tilt or phase angle of that photon as a torus, because that's the reason the color is perceived in a cone. Simple physics, no one could argue. But once you know that, then you need to know what is the tilt of the photon as a toroid phase angle. Because obviously, we say color is wavelength, but not true. The photon is 3 dimensions. Oh, it's a donut. So if we look at the visible spectrum, red to ultra red through violet, it's exactly 1 octave, which represents 180-degree tilt of the photon as a torus. And we see here that if we do the accurate frequencies of the colors of the rainbow on that graph from 0 to 180 degrees, all of the colors are 0, 45, 90, 135, 180, simple cubic angles, no problem. So for example, green, we now know why green prevents photosynthesis, because it's a 90-degree tilt of the photon. It's cubic, and any astrologer will tell you the 90 degrees is not so fun. It's destructive wave interference cubic. Well, there's only two other angles remaining, the yellow and the blue. They are 63 and 117 degrees. And they happen to be the tilt angle of a dodecahedron, pent. In other words, the donuts nest themselves in a pent dodeca, and that is, in physics, is called phase conjugation. And in psychology, it's called the cause of the existence of rainbows. So the photons are sorted into cubic dodeca angles And we call that the origin of rainbows. And there's a long conversation. We can prove the physics of the green flash based on that. So phase conjugation is the reason color exists. And the reason that you see rainbows when Tibetans die is because they have centripetal force, which is the function of consciousness among stars, is to add that centripetal force.
When you're talking about all that, my head is sort of referencing what's being popularized right now in the biohacking movement and color therapy and photobiomodulation in its various applications. And a lot of people are using frequencies. I don't remember, they're kind of all a little bit different, but they're in the red, in the infrared, near infrared range for affecting mitochondria, for doing some things like Gerald Pollack's talking about, increasing EZ water or exclusion zone water with the charge gradients. Does that line up with golden mean ratios, golden mean harmonics in any way, or are we just looking at something totally disparate here when I bring this topic up?
No, all frequencies are essentially pulse modulation. So pulse modulation is another description. And it's true that once we know the reason photosynthesis exists is phase conjugation based on golden ratio times Planck, then we could tune and fix all of those proposals to make life better. And we have now solid state LED light emitting systems now tuned to my equation to prove that that would optimize growth. We have been successful, for example, in treating water using this geometry here in my imploder, which I don't know if that thing's going to play. Oh, there it goes. We can get the animation. So I took my equation for that golden spiral on that cone and did the CAD-CAM and built charge implosion in water, we call Victor Schauberger's dream imploder nozzle. And this is successful in also 20 countries or so, the imploder.com. And what happens is that if the water is conductive at all, that vortex will be piezo, which means charge implosive. So much so that a plant growing next to the nozzle vortex will grow faster even if it doesn't get that water. And we know exactly why. For the same reason that Schauberger knew when his vortex spontaneously started getting colder was the moment it would start making voltage from gravity.
Mm. So does the human body, since we're not using photosynthesis directly, does the human body utilize frequencies, have any sort of peak frequencies that it likes or prefers? The inverse of, the inverse of green, would we be more beneficial to using green color?
Well, obviously, the frequencies that serve photosynthesis would serve the body as well. I mean, we displayed here that earlier slide. See if we can find it again, showing the sacrocranial harmonics. Yeah, here they are. So here are the brainwave harmonics the body uses, my equation. Here's the Schumann harmonics the body uses, my equation. Here's the heart rate variability harmonics, my equation, 0.1 Hertz, for example, the Mayer wave, the most important frequency in the body, the most important frequency in the blood, and the most important frequency in the HRV, the LF, all the Mayer wave, 0.1 Hertz, and the sacrocranial. They all exactly agree with my equation. So obviously we know what frequencies, this is the sacrocranial again. But here, for example, another example, here's the biggest study ever done in medicine on what frequencies heal cancer. So on the right, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 studies showed 50 Hertz, and the one study showed 20 Hertz, et cetera. And this is my equation on the left. So basically, my equation predicted beautifully the frequencies medicine uses to prevent cancer. And here, in purple, I don't know if you can see this, but in purple are the harmonics predicted by my equation, 2.78, 11.8, 50, 80. And these are the frequencies Antoine Prieur used for the plasma device that healed thousands of cancer in France, proven by the French government, 3, 10, 32, and 80. So he didn't know what phase conjugation was, but he healed thousands of cancers and got those frequencies from Rife and Lagosky and Tesla, actually. And so once we discovered the principle behind it, we could build it. And by the way, that device radically accelerated growth in plants, as does the Therify, for the same reason.
Got it. Okay, well, let's talk about the Therify a little bit. This is So this is not this is a little different in compared to the flame in mind, where the flame in mind is sort of displaying how lined up you are, aligned you are with these golden ratio peaks. The Therapy actually applies these peaks to a physical body for sort of physical healing.
Well, right. So what we have here, this is the photograph. We take the low frequencies, which are exactly my equation, a complex wave shape, and we mix that with a sub-megahertz and make a broad spectral complex phase conjugate wave. And then we output that from this amp here to the right to this bifilar Tesla coil, which then splits that into two wave shapes, 180 degrees out of phase precisely, called pine cones kissing noses, the definition of phase conjugation, which priori never used, and then dump that complex, precisely broad spectral phase conjugating pine cones kissing noses into the two plasma tubes, which are vortex and rotating. And the noble gas there is also optically phase conjugate. So we have the most broad spectral phase conjugation possible, given the limitations, and that is means more powerfully negentropic than other devices to date. You know, Lakosky used golden ratio, but he didn't use plasma, so it couldn't be broad spectral. And Lakosky professionals say Therapy is like Lakosky, but so much more powerful and so much faster. This is an animation, I don't know if you can see it, that shows how the plasma actually rotates in a spiral vortex. And this is the inspiration, the tubes, which are not light bulbs in Egypt. No, they are plasma tubes called I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, which are triggered by a high voltage, which is an age reversing technology, which is what the Egyptians called the Shem. So even though later we called the Shem the name of the altar in church, Highward Firestone, in fact, it was a negentropic conjugate field that was age reversing, that was center to all the Sumerian text.
So the Caduceus that you have here in the bottom right, there looks like two that are touching there at the Planck dimension as you have them. Your comment about the Medical Association not knowing what their logo was used for. So is this where the original Caduceus came from? This design
Yes.
for it, and somehow got lost along the way?
Yes, we think clearly charge implosion. You know, Einstein was clear, an infinite non-destructive charge collapse was the solution to all his problems, but he never knew what a fractal was or what a fractal field was. An infinite non-destructive charge collapse obviously now is phase conjugation through the Planck threshold into longitudinal waves. So that's exactly what the Hermetic revolution was about, absolutely for sure. And that slide of how that works, which is here. So, you know, Bearden and everyone all knew for sure that you had to generate a longitudinal EMF if you want to do any healing. Or, by the way, if you wanted to reduce radioactive half-life, which is true at the Earth grid cross points. So what you do is you take the transverse wave and it enters this pine cone, spiral on a cone called Caduceus, phase conjugation. And the optimized translation of vorticity, which is the name for golden spiral in hydrodynamics, converts that transverse inertia to longitudinal electromagnetic, which is how all sound waves travel, but most of our electromagnetics are used only in the transverse component. So when you focus the longitudinal component or compressional wave, that compressional wave longitudinal EMF will go through the speed of light measurably by golden ratio harmonics, and it will go through just about anything. And if you cross, again, that longitudinal EMF at a distance, you do what Ingo Swann did so well. He heated the thermistor with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage measured, called flameinmind.com. And we know how that works. Einstein called action at a distance spooky because he didn't know why an object falls to the ground. Gravity waves are longitudinal waves. And he didn't know how longitudinal waves can store heat at a distance, which is the holy grail of all fusion research.
So I just recently had to do sort of a basics on EMF to understand the difference between transverse and longitudinal waves. And I wonder if you could maybe explain that to people very simply, and some of its known applications people will be familiar with. As you mentioned, that sound travels longitudinally.
Yes, yes, but well, if you, and every wave is basically, it's moving some up and down and some back and forth. And the up and down component, as the wave goes down a slinky, we call transverse. Whereas the compressional component, as the wave goes down a slinky, we call longitudinal. A good way to think about it is the famous story of the tsunami. So the tsunami is traveling faster than a jet airplane, but you don't see it in the ocean because it's a compressional wave. But when it hits the shore, which is the side of that pine cone, the compressional component is translated in vorticity to the, then again, transverse, up and down, and that does the destruction. A very good metaphor, because if you cross these longitudinal waves at a distance, then suddenly they will resynthesize their heat-containing component, and you can make a flame with with your mind and do action at a distance, famously called the Russian woodpecker in Tom Bearden's extensive work on longitudinal EMF.
You mentioned Ingo Swann. I just interviewed Russell Targ, who was sort of integral in bringing him into the fore and utilizing his skill set. I heard you also mention in another interview that, was it Karakov that was even doing this when you said military grade basically
telepathy.
telepathy, remote viewing, essentially we're talking about. And so you're saying this is the physics behind how remote viewing works. And could you also apply that to precognition?
Yes, yes. That essentially every single mysterious spiritual phenomena you can name, from telepathy to how to go through death to Agnihotra to how to build a graveyard properly, every single one of those phenomena, or why nuclear critical mass is affected by Earth grid magnetic crosses, every single one of those phenomena, you don't have a clue until you know how longitudinal EMF works. Then you know the complete physics of every single one of them, the collective unconscious community. So how does it work? Well, basically, the Earth grid we know is dodecaecosa. Well, what Karakov measured was, the famous Kozyrev mirror, which is basically a microwave coherent metal cylinder. And we now know how to tune that microwave, adenosine diphosphate, 1.91 angstroms, to make telepathy work better. And we know that you need to do it at sunrise and sunset. So all of this physics has now informed those dozens of Therify plasma centers that are very successfully doing healing at a distance with Therify. We can inform them of the physics of how healing at a distance works and how to make it work better. Place it where magnetic lines cross. In the case of Karakov's work with the Kozyrev mirror, first step, measure the Earth magnetic line crosses in nanoteslas. And where they cross, they're resynthesizing that longitudinal EMF component, which is DNA, radio, and the physics of telepathy. And that longitudinal component will work better, of course, at sunrise and sunset, which is the physics of Agnihotra, which is done in a phase conjugate capacitor with phase conjugate plasma, same principle. And you can make, Garden of Eden in the desert if you do Agnihotra, right? And by the way, Bhopal and Nagasaki, they survived better, the ones who did Agnihotra, and we know why. So this is an introduction to how to design a burial ground, and you literally cannot locate a burial ground, a cathedral, a labyrinth, or a Therify or a Kozyrev properly unless you know where the magnetic lines cross.
These crossing of magnetic lines, or the magnetic lines themselves, are also termed ley lines. Is that correct?
Yes, actually the DC component is classically what Karakov was using, but in the advanced geobiology, we actually know the frequency and power spectra of the maximum deflection of those lines from the work of our partner in advanced geobiology, Stefan Cardinal in Lausanne, geniedelieu.ch. Read all about it at goldenmean.info/geobiology. So the Hartmann-Curry Pei-Ray Palm lines, we know the frequency and the spectra and the relationships. For example, the Pei-Ray line is max deflected by gold, best way to save a beehive, and we know why. It's phase conjugate, basically.
Let's attempt, anyways, I will, to connect these magnetic field lines that are happening naturally in the Earth to the 0.1 Hertz, roughly 0.1 Hertz Mayer wave. I'm bringing this up because it's sort of activating a memory I had. I was speaking to Roland McCready at HeartMath about, they're also very focused on this 0.1 Hertz peak in heart coherence. And they have, I don't think, 15 or 20 magnetometers they've got set up around the world at this point. And he was telling me that the Earth's resonant frequency is zero point 0.1 hertz, the same as the human resonant, the optimal resonant frequency in the autonomic nervous system anyways. And I wonder, is there a connection that can be explained through these magnetic field lines?
Well, it's clear. Here is the 0.1 hertz, 0.096 hertz from the equation. Here's the 0.1 hertz of Mayer. Our website called the Heart Math Mistake, you know, Roland didn't know how to take an EKG or take his power spectrum EKG till I taught him, and then he screwed up the definition of coherence. I love teasing him, but they've done some great work. But you see, the reason why we call that not heart coherence is because real heart coherence is harmonic inclusive. So obviously, if you only teach people to make one peak, which is medically known to be fatal, that isn't real heart coherence. Real heart coherence is harmonic inclusive. And to measure broad spectral heart coherence, which I invented the term heart coherence because I discovered how to measure the second order power spectra. That's the basis of our iThrive.com, ITHRVE, iThrive.com, most advanced. So we teach a breathing cascade that teaches a harmonic inclusive instead of a harmonic exclusive definition of coherence, which is a faulty definition of coherence that Roland McCready uses. So I just enjoy teasing him, so I have to bring that up. But anywho, still.
Okay. So let me pause you right there, because I'm interested to connect this now to Flame in Mind. So what you're saying, so in their system, right, they're talking about basically a 10-second breath, 5 in, 5
That's
out.
right.
With, and as you get more adept, an increased positive emotion or a higher valence emotion, so that you are also including contemplation on appreciation, gratitude, love, joy, etc., etc. So that these emotions, through focused attention, can increase these golden ratio harmonics.
But and it's true. Roland did a real service by teaching people to breathe at 10 seconds, 0.1 hertz. That was a real service. Calling that heart coherence was a mistake, but still, the 0.1 hertz is a useful thing. I'm just showing you the iThrive website here, where we have some examples of this harmonic inclusive breathing. Let's see if cranial sacral wave display, the breath application, if I can find it here. So what we teach is after you learn to breathe at one frequency, which is a good start, but a bad finish, we teach people to breathe a golden mean ratio breath cascade, where then they can see their heart coherence, their actual heart HRV make a Caduceus. And at the climax of that Caduceus, they will have a real bliss experience. So, breathing at one frequency is a good start, but a bad finish. But still, Roland's point is it good in terms of 0.1 hertz being related to the Earth grid. But what he doesn't understand is that the Earth grid harmonics are tuned to 0.1 hertz because of my equation. Golden ratio multiples of Planck predict not just 0.1 hertz, but the exact frequencies of Schumann. And actually, they also predict how to fix the Schumann harmonics to make Gaia, the Earth grid, more negentropic. So that another example of this is the famous Princeton Noosphere project. They have what they call a Josephson junction, which is
Dan,
actually simple.
You are blowing me up right now, Dan, with the way that you're connecting all this together. Okay, good. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Roland is right. They did help the conversation with Princeton Noosphere project, which showed that when 10 million people feel the same emotion at the same time, their random number generator changes. But just like Bill Tiller, when he measured that focused human emotion causes electric fields to compress, he was clueless as to why, just about as clueless as Einstein was to why objects fall to the ground. And so too with Princeton Noosphere, they're clueless as to the mechanic. The mechanic is actually simple. The Josephson junction is capacitive coupling, and capacitive coupling enables cohering a longitudinal wave component. And so, the real measurement of that is probably best seen when at fractalu.com. Let's see if we can show that slide here. When 1 million children sang the same song together at the same moment, it was measured 11 different times. A dramatic reduction in the number of solar flares. And we now know why, because, you know, the sun went to a lot of trouble to make DNA, because we make a centripetal force that stars need. So the physics of the Princeton Noosphere project is the implosive centripetal longitudinal coupling that results from collective human attention. And the physics of the way they're picking it up is capacitive coupling. And they don't get it from why the Josephson junction is working. But anyway, that's.
Well, now I'm finally seeing in a clearer way how I Thrive, Flame and Mind, Therify all interconnect via the golden mean harmonics.
That's right. They're all tuned to the same power structure. Exactly. And by the way, the Flame and Mind has HRV capacity built in, parallel to some of the I Thrive functions.
Okay, so I'm curious, in your experience, what induces the bliss experience more effective for the most amount of people? Is it the breathing biofeedback, looking at their HRV, or is it basically, is it coming from the heart or coming from the head? Is kind of where my question is. You know what I'm saying? Can you can induce the thing top down or bottom up, right?
Well, you know, as many have talked, and I was the first one to point out, I think that the EKGs in millivolts and the brainwaves are microvolts. So clearly, then HeartMath picked that idea up. But clearly the heart has more voltage to contribute, and the heart's low frequency phonon has to cohere for the sacrocranial to fire up, which is the physics of Kundalini. So actually, maybe that's the slide to share here.
Yeah, that's a missing link for me, a whole area, because I'm not schooled in cranial sacral therapies or osteopathy.
So you've just seen the slide that proves the spine liquid pump harmonics fit my equation. Well, that spine liquid pump then arrives here as a rotating phonon toroid, motorizing the crystallization of the ventricle horns here, which activates a sequence of magnetic triggers on the homunculus, little man, which feels like a vice-like grip going up your tailbone, but it's quote unquote all in your head. But the physics here on the bottom is clear. This is Bentov, who was my teacher. We spent a lot of time together, and talking the wild pendulum. And here's where he's showing the beginning of this phenomena is the phonon standing wave on the aorta, AKG, HRV coherence, which when that phonon standing wave measurably triggers the phonon liquids in the sacrocranial pump, that's the beginning of Kundalini and motorizing this toroid around the hemisphere, and ultimately the flame out your crown. So the breath is your control of your HRV, EKG, and that then is the spine liquid pump working, and then you can measure that success in the EEG after the heart has done its part.
Interesting. My goodness. One technique for also inducing this this sort of Kundalini experience, this ecstatic experience, is with a lot of Bandha activation. You're probably familiar with that by Mula Bandha, pelvic floor activation, transversus abdominis activation, where you're mechanically trying to induce that to some extent. It would make sense. Would it make sense to be doing that in some particular rhythm as well?
Oh, yes, of course. And there'd be a phonon geometry for sure. Few people know that when we measured Kundalini in the microwave, we used the adenosine diphosphate 1.91 angstrom microwave, which also turned out to be the ultimate microwave scanner to measure the earth grid, the way you measure fire in the spine. We were measuring the coherent UV and microwave going up the spine from the tailbone. The tailbone has vestigial horsehairs that turn inside out and suck the blue fire. So if we start with our wave mechanic model of cancer here, let's see if we can get our visuals together. We're really being ambitious today, but the wave mechanical model of cancer was a series of harmonics that start with a long wave. Trying to find that slide. It's basically the food that comes into the living cell is a long wave. And as that long wave is converted into shorter and shorter waves, the cell ultimately produces coherent ultraviolet, which is the blue fire, the sex juice of the cell. This is the phonon harmonics. This is the frequencies measured in the ringing in the ears of meditators in black, and in red is my equation. So we even know why your ear rings and what it means, and as Valerie knows, which ancestor is phoning. But
Okay,
this,
okay. So you're saying this sort of medical pathology that people call tinnitus.
well, tinnitus is real, but there's a superset of that, which is the ringing in the ears heard by meditators, which is ancestors making phone calls, which is the result of this phonon wave concressing at the ventricle horns, making the magnetic phonon toroid climax to implode around the pineal. And these are this frequency, the high frequency pitch heard by meditators, data collected, elaborate study, Bentoff, in black, and here's my equation for what those harmonics should be, so we know what's going on and why your phonon is imploding. Well, but this is the slide we came here to see, was here's a long wave coming into cell metabolism, then you have DNA precursors, and what drives all cell metabolism is high quality coherent UV light. It's the motor of cellular biophysics. It's why the mitochondria is fractal. So that ultraviolet coherent blue fire is the climax of cell metabolism. And that's sex juice. That's the creative stuff of the cell. If the cell is spherical and hard and won't respond to touch, contact inhibition, which is the only definition of cancer, then the ultraviolet has to bounce back to cell core and triggers premature meiosis mitosis cell division. Or if there's a path for that UV up the spine liquid pump, this tailbone bunda, then it really sucks. The spine liquid is sucked up the tailbone, and actually you can see that actual haploid sperm will go up the spine, and even the clear liquid of the prostate will emerge from the penis minus the sperm. That pump can be so strong. And that causes an explosion of nutrient and growth at the high brain, which can be fatal or powerful, depending on whether able to handle it. But we know very much about what's going on. And so the phonon geometry of the bunda pressure is an example of understanding the physics of the spine liquid pump for sure. Something that I do not think Wilhelm Reich understood at all when he wrote The Function of the Orgasm.
How would one decide which tool would be the ideal tool for their situation, whether it be the Therify, the iThrive, or the Flame in Mind app? In other words, if someone is dealing with, say, some physical health challenge, would it make sense to go to Therify as the first option, or would they start with iThrive?
I mean, really, I'm not entirely a capitalist here. Actually, the first thing that anybody needs to do is hygiene, like diet and lifestyle and yoga, for sure. Now, we have some tools to help, but really that is step one. As far as tools, though, iThrive is cheap, and you can learn breath and therefore HRV coherence very inexpensively, and it's fun and it's cool. So that's cool. $20, $40, whatever. Depending, it'll talk to 4 different transducers: a finger clipper, an ear clipper, a chest strap, and you do overnight analysis of deep sleep to see if you got the critical deep dream. Remember that episode of Star Trek where nobody could get deep sleep and everybody was grouchy? So iPhone is cool and powerful. It actually has an accelerometer on your bed, tell you when you're lucid dreaming. Really cool. So iThrive's cheap. It's fun. Flame in Mind adds the brainwave option. Super powerful. My previous brainwave application, Bliss Tuner, cost $3,000. Now, Flame in Mind, the software's around 200, and the hardware's around 200 something. It's 10% of the previous cost, and you get the most powerful brainwave capability. It's very powerful. But that being said, let's be clear. Probably only, 1 person in 5 can start really making coherent alpha. And you can't have any fun until you can make some alpha. So, let's be real. People need to learn how to make some alpha in their brain. And there's no better tool to do that, perhaps, than Flame in Mind. You know the old story. The day you teach the alcoholic how to make alpha with a little biofeedback game like Flame in Mind, on that same day, the next drink of beer doesn't taste good. Mm-hmm. And you know why? Obviously, because if you can make alpha, then, which is Schumann, then when you close your eyes, you can see light. If you cannot make alpha, then when you close your eyes, you're going to see dark. The reason is because if you're making alpha, you got the Schumann, and that plasma is the eyes of Earth. So you drink beer to turn the lights on because the alcohol increased the conductivity and therefore the likelihood of making alpha. So the self-empowerment of learning to make alpha is just the beginning. Then once you can make alpha, then you learn the advanced technique, golden ratio to the frequencies of beta and theta, which is super powerful and powerful. So Flame in Mind. So Flame in Mind, couple $100, you can have much more advanced fun. Now, the Therify plasma system takes all those frequencies and puts them very powerfully in plasma, 500,000 volts, super cool, megahertz range. I mean, top of the line, super powerful. Therify's, you know, very expensive, 20 to 25,000 bucks. This is not cheap. So generally, people use it in commercial centers. That being said, we're in 20 countries and there's dozens in the United States. You know, Therify.net, you'll find centers. So go visit one and try it. But certainly for things like pain reduction and bliss and sharpened vision, all kinds of things. I mean, the reports are extensive. We make no medical claims, but the anecdotal reports are off the charts. Plus, it's fun.
Getting back to your comment about we make something that stars need, and this relationship between DNA and the sun. Can you extrapolate? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, you know, we've had this conversation before. I like to start with Kurt Vonnegut, Breakfast of Champions, when he's drinking the Breakfast of Champions at the bar, which is whiskey, and ask, what are people for? It seems like today, physics did not have an answer. So not only do they not know why objects fall to the ground, and they do not know why anything is negentropic. They think the universe is condemned to entropy. They also don't know what people are for. So I think science has a problem, actually. but now we do know what people are for, actually. If you've interviewed Ray Moody, which you should, he's proven that death visions are electrically contagious. And we have the visuals, but I won't dig them out right now. But at the death experience, people see lattice cobweb tunnel spiral called the Heinrich-Klüver form constants. So successful death is an electrical black hole for a very important reason. We now know exactly where's the correct place for birth and death, which is the same magnetic line crosspoint. Because your aura needs to be imploded through the Planck threshold into longitudinal, which is ancestral memory, collective unconscious DNA radio, and the centripetal force of gravity waves that hold stars together. So not only is the definition of being a shaman to be plasma projective shaman, but the purpose of growing up, and this is a schoolroom a long way from downtown, is to become centripetal. The more centripetal you are, the bigger the tornado you can steer. And that doesn't end with just your body.
I interviewed Dr. Ibrahim Karim a while back, and he has a term called negative green that he uses. And how is this relative to the actual color green?
He's a sweet guy. We had a big argument in which he kept screaming, but I can kill you with it. I can kill you with it. And I said, yes, but you don't know why. And he doesn't. He doesn't understand physics because electrical engineering is completely past him. But the physics is that the phase angle of the toroid photon as green is 90 degrees cubic and opposite to phase conjugate. So that's why it can kill you. So just because you have a gun doesn't mean you know how it works. So I say to Mr. Karim, no, you don't know how it works. But no, he's done a lot of good work, and he's demonstrated that geometry of capacitance creates growth force. But again, he doesn't have a clue of why, which is phase conjugate charge implosion.
But so the negative green is actually the same color as green, or it's a different. Okay, got it.
If you had pure active green, not only would those photons precisely prevent photosynthesis, they would prevent life. And I'm the first one to explain why, because that 90-degree phase angle called the octave, and the equations which we proved, golden ratio optimizes constructive interference, also proved that powers of 2, the octave, is maximum destructive wave interference. That doesn't mean tetracubic wave symmetry is evil, but it does mean it creates charge isolation, which is the opposite of life.
Wow. Well, what are we missing here that, I know what we're missing. We're missing a conversation about hydrogen. Hydrogen is also something that's being talked a lot about in, say, functional medicine, biohacker movements, people putting hydrogen into water, hydrogen tablets, adding hydrogen, breathing hydrogen. As far as I understand, it's to gather an electron from that. But I wonder what you have to say about that.
Well, I was the one right here that wrote the equation that first proved hydrogen is fractal. So here is my equation, golden ratio, exact golden ratio exponents, integer exponents times Planck length and time. And here are 3 exact hydrogen radii predicted. ADP, photosynthesis, the British foot, sacred dimension, LF, Venus year, Earth year, precession, galactic year. So the origin of negentropy, the title of my book, this is the cover of my book, fractalfield.com. So now we know why hydrogen is implosive. We also know how it makes gravity, because it's electrically centripetal. And we also know that it's the center of every DNA ladder rung codon bond. It is the zipper up the DNA we call soul. It is implosive. So obviously, if you get stable monoatomic hydrogen, you have magic. And remember when, Caduceus so famously, he lit a little radio frequency antenna next to a glass of cold water, and that glass of cold water burned beautifully. And that there's hundreds of YouTube videos. Well, we actually built that antenna system and spent $100,000 with a lab in Melbourne, proving the physics, and we're extending that. Basically, the key was the longitudinal RF antenna. Anyway, so hydrogen absolutely is fractal and is magic, and it's true. If you get more free hydrogen in water, you got magic, absolutely, like deuterium, very high energy. So yeah, there's a lot to hydrogen, but the fractality of hydrogen is then the metaphor for the whole atomic table. So, when they show that famous film from the Joe cell in Australia, and we know him pretty well, Joe, they show this hydrogen gas wandering around like it's self-aware, like it's a living worm. Well, guess what? It's implosive plasma. The same way the plasma from the Therapy needs to be treated like the family pet puppy dog. It has to like you or you're in trouble. It's self-aware.
It seems that your understanding of sort of the physics of all these applications is related to electric universe theory.
Absolutely. I really like it that the electric universe physicists, now they all believe in angels. and no, because first of all, you start from the beginning. The universe is comprised of a single superfluid compressible media called charge, where the centripetal compression of that charge is plus and minus charge. And then the universe is crystal clear that cloud of charge named plasma is 99.999% of the volume of the universe. Conventional physicists is clear. And then if that plasma or charge rotates, then it stores the inertia, which is the only definition of mass, and it has a period, which is the only definition of time. Einstein didn't get it. Time is simply charge rotating, and so is mass. So once you know how plasma stores inertia called mass, you also can learn what gravity and how it becomes centripetal. And that's when you learn how plasma becomes self-aware when it phase conjugates, because it creates that holy communion at center, the phase conjugate to Planck. And that's the DNA radio that makes plasma intelligent. The famous paper in electrical engineering is called Allicin barium titanate land, where they take a phase conjugate dielectric, which is the physics of the philosopher's stone, the Kaaba stone, which is a super high dielectric material. And they discovered the plasma that emerges in phase conjugate dielectric is self-aware. It will find itself at a distance. A great paper, Allicin barium titanate land. So yes, it's all about plasma universe for sure. And plasma, and so what we used to call God is plasma, and that makes our understanding of God richer, not simplistic.
And so are you saying that the more centripetal and the more implosive a form is, an entity is, the more self-aware they are?
Yes, because centripetal force is ultimately not sustainable unless the convergence at center creates perfected charge distribution, which you could correctly call a shareable wave. So, the Sufi was right. If you can do that dervish turn and not get dizzy, your Sufi master knows you have pure intention, because you have created gravity, because you are now ready to inhabit the center of a lightning bolt to think thoughts that are only pure principle, which means you're ready to die.
It's so fascinating, because I've spoken to a few people who have had encounters with, I don't even know how to describe it, higher level beings, for lack of a better word, and everyone is communicating telepathically in this environment, and that it's not even telepathic, it's just everyone is understood. In other words, there's no secrets. There's a ubiquitous sharing across everyone part of this network. And is this kind of this same thing that you're talking about?
Very tricky question.
Yeah, okay.
Our ancestors, Anunnaki, Draco, Uru, Nephilim, they had a lipid oil blood and silicon-based nervous tissue, carbon bone, and breathed in nitrogen and out cyanogen. And water and oxygen were poison to them. And so the Earth's atmosphere caused them to age, which is why they invented rejuvenation. But anyway, their silicon-based nervous structure meant higher phase wave propagation velocities in the nervous system, which meant dominant high frequency. So they had very good high frequency coherence, the Dracos, which meant excellent telepathy. Read all the people who, but in that case, they had zero low frequency coherence. They never got theta, which meant they never had access to the collective unconscious. And ultimately, empathy. Empathy is the actual ability to embed in a longer wave. So is there a trade-off between empathy and telepathy? I shall never be alone. I am 7 of 9. It is a privilege to be assimilated. So total telepathy is not always the same as empathy. Interestingly, we measured in the telepath frequently octaves in brainwave EEG power spectra versus golden ratio in the empath. So very interesting. And the brainwave power spectra is very revealing in that regard.
Wow. Well, Dan, I guess I would just like to leave this open to you. Anything that you want to make sure we get in the conversation before signing off?
Well, I really thank you for asking the right questions. In all the conversation about technologies, the technologies are wonderful, and we have implemented the idea of implosion in water, in plasma, in brainwave, and heart rate variability. You can read all the technologies at implosiongroup.com and fractalfield.com. But remember, all of this is only a superstructure for what is the basic decision of everyday life, which is the hygiene for bliss, which is basically every action you take. It needs to be based on the idea is, does it make my aura grow or not? Because your aura, your ka, your boat to the underworld is what takes you through death, for example. And therefore you could define the function of governments. Remember, we said the body polis, which defines whether a beehive can navigate, is a plasma cloud. And when a group of people has a body polis, it means they've had bliss experience together. And by definition, that's the beginning of their ability to navigate and ultimately go through the sun. So the physics of politics is literally collective bliss. So yes, every government on the planet is scared to death if a group of people has bliss together, because it makes them create the only real biologic meaning of government. So the hygiene to find your soul group and have your bliss cocoon, to enable lucid dreaming and taking memory through death, and eventually your soul group going to the heart of the sun, that's the hygiene, that's the real science. And a few gadgets may help, but discipline is required.
I guess one final thought here is, I was recently at the Transformative Technology Conference in Palo Alto. I think it's the 6th year that they have this now. And Dr. Jeffrey Martin, who is one of the co-founders, has been doing some interesting research into sort of studying psychologically, physiologically, currently living awakened people, and defining these sort of categories of awakening, and now working on some technology that's sort of push button in a way that allows someone to have this experience of basically shutting the default mode network off, going, there's no self-referential thinking, you're sort of just there, right? You're having this experience of peace and love. And he was talking about the technology itself and using ultrasound and megahertz frequencies. They didn't say exactly which ones, they're proprietary, but ultrasound being shot deep below into the limbic area, so the basal ganglia, and that there is an effect that it has on the thalamus, and shutting this whole thing down. And Hammeroff was, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he was part
Sure.
of this sort of self-experimentation discovery. Does that fit in anywhere? Do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I have just defined the corrected infrasound, the subsonics. You have seen my equations for that, and
Yeah.
that applies directly to the ultrasonics. So certainly there would be ultrasonic component. But I would remind those people that on this planet, the only persons who ever got their aura strong enough to melt stone, documented Padmasambhava and John Trofimius, who started the whole Grail story when he melted his coffin lid. He kneeled on his coffin lid. The stone was carried around by a Roman legion for a decade. Of the melted stone, he melted with his aura. He did it with the hygiene, and those people never did it except anywhere but a cave. And there's reason for the physics of that. These people are talking to you about how to get bliss, who are living in metal structures with electrosmog and dead air. I'm sorry, sir, they do not understand.
Well, thank you for being so generous with your time, Dan. And I also, listeners, go check. You have an amazing YouTube channel. I mean, so prolific in all of your writings and all your links. We'll post those in the show notes. I really appreciate you giving so much information so freely. So good luck in your work.
Thank you for being there. Thanks for asking the right question. You know, all those links are accessible directly from fractalfield.com. Thanks again. Stay in touch. And I'm available to you and your readers if there's any way we can practically help each other. Thank you for caring. Really. Blessings.